Kataoka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. A British man who drove into pedestrians and stabbed a security guard outside a Manchester synagogue has been shot dead by police, prompting British Prime Minister Keir Starmer to reinforce security at synagogues nationwide and British government to vow to fight anti-Semitism. Israeli forces have intercepted nearly all boats in the Gaza aid smooth flotilla, including one carrying Greta Thunberg, who claimed in a pre-recorded video that she was abducted by Israeli troops, sparking global protests in many countries, including Italy and Turkey, amid rising diplomatic tensions. Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati has said that Cairo, along with Qatar and Turkey, is pressing Hamas to accept President Donald Trump's ceasefire plan to end the nearly two-year war in Gaza. The proposal unveiled by the White House this week calls for hostage prisoner exchange, Israeli withdrawal, Hamas disarmament, among other demands. French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu has announced that he will not use Article 49.3 of the Constitution to pass the budget without a parliamentary vote. Insisting lawmakers must reach a compromise, Prime Minister has stressed that in a recently renewed parliament reflecting France's diversity, forcing legislation is no longer acceptable. Russia has launched a massive overnight attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure using 381 drones and 35 missiles, targeting key gas facilities in Kharkiv and Poltava regions, according to Ukrainian Energy Ministry. The attack struck several regions in eastern Ukraine, but authorities have not yet released details on the damage caused. A Finnish district court has dismissed the case against the captain and two officers of the Eager Oil's tanker to rule out that they have no jurisdiction over the 2024 Baltic Sea cable breach. The crew pleaded not guilty, claiming a technical fault caused the anchor to drop unnoticed, further complicating efforts to prove the criminal intent. Vietnam's death toll from Typhoon Boaloi has now risen to 51 people, with 14 missing and 164 injured, as the central bank urges banks to support affected businesses, according to local government reports, while the storm has caused an estimated $603 million in damage. The death toll from the collapse of the boarding school in Indonesia has risen to 9 people, with nearly 60 students still trapped under the rubble. Rescuers using cranes and sensors continue to search through the debris after the building collapsed during afternoon prayers, leaving mostly teenage boys aged 13 to 19 dead or injured. Now we move on. Manchester has been shaken by a deadly terror attack outside the Heaton Park Hebrew Congregation Synagogue. Two men, 53-year-old Adrian Dolby and 66-year-old Melvin Kravitz, were both killed when a man drove into pedestrians and attacked people with a knife. The suspect, identified as 35-year-old Jihad al-Shami, is a British citizen of Syrian descent who was shot dead by police at the scene. 3 others have been hospitalized with serious injuries, and authorities have arrested 3 additional people in connection with this incident, which has been declared a terrorist attack. Public outrage and grief have followed this attack, with flowers and notes left near the synagogue. Neighbors of the suspect described living in the area as frightening, while the UK's chief rabbi has condemned the attack as the result of an unrelenting wave of Jew hatred. Let's listen into what a local resident has said.
And then after they loaded up in the cars and drove off, and the minibus drove off, and the police van came in, literally came to the Crescent, they opened the side of the police van, and there must have been about 15 police officers that got out the van and went straight into number 1 Langley Crescent. And I'm thinking, this is not normal. Quite scary, to be truthful. Quite scary indeed, knowing that a terrorist is living under my nose. You know, from here to that address, what is it, 2-minute walk, if that. And to have somebody like that living on my estate is scary, very scary.
Has there been any, I mean, I know there's no real indication of this kind of thing usually, but have you ever had any indication of any trouble
No.
in that crescent?
No.
Memorials were held today to honor the victims as worshippers and local residents paid their respects. The city of Manchester continues to come to terms with the shock of this tragic event, while authorities investigate the circumstances surrounding the attack. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical commentator, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Mark, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, what more can you tell us about this shocking, tragic incident?
Assume good to be with you again. As you have just commented on, so this terrorist act, this terrorist drove a car into members of that congregation outside. As you've just reported on, sadly, the security then got out. The security guard was stabbed to death. Other members there were stabbed. Someone else has died. So 2 people have died, and 3 other people are fighting for their lives in hospital. And then, of course, the assailant in this, the terrorist, because we will call it a terrorist act because it is, was then, in my opinion, was then taken out. This is horrendous. This is awful, and especially this was conducted on the day of Yom Kippur, on the Day of Atonement, the holiest day within the Jewish calendar, and that has to be noted because that is why on this terrorist then, in my opinion, then decided to act on this particular day, and the congregation were inside the synagogue at the time. This kind of effect, of course, as you've just said, that report within the area and how this affects people on the ground is devastating, as has just been said by in that report. But we have to put this against the backdrop that we have seen marches since the 7th of October, within days, hours, minutes. There have been protests for pro-Palestine protests in London virtually every weekend and every other weekend, and I was to say they even were carried out yesterday. There was one down Whitehall near Downing Street, and Downing Street there, one in Manchester and elsewhere, which I think is in a little bit of poor taste, to say the least. But this is the backdrop of creating this environment, and there has not been enough pushback against this by the government, in my opinion. And also, if we look at the way within the media, the way this is with various reports, things said within the public discourse have not helped and have fed into this. Assume.
Yes. And Mark, like you've said, now after this incident, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has increased police presence or security at synagogues nationwide. Do you think that this is a little late, since this incident has already occurred, and it maybe elsewhere it can occur too in the UK?
I don't want to see this escalate at all. But my fear is that it may do. But it's the discourse, it's the comments that have been said. Remember, the UK have decided to recognise a Palestinian state, to recognise a state that doesn't exist. And then what happens is, if politically it doesn't go that way to that ideology and thought, and then they all have an appalling temper tantrum and start rioting in Milan and Spain and other cities, which we witnessed last night. We witnessed a few days ago, as I've said previously. Giorgia Meloni says, I'm not recognizing a Palestinian state, so people think it's perfectly acceptable to go and riot in Milan. No, this is bullying. This is absolute bullying, and people need to understand the historical facts of why we are at this point. And if I, not that they will listen, but the Palestinians then within that construct that was created by Yasser Arafat in 1964, Palestinianism, have turned around and have refused a separate state 4 times to live, as they would call it, live by the state of Israel, which is the only democratic country in that region within the Middle East. There are many other Arab states, and you could quite, as I have said, historically, Jordan, when it was founded, is the Palestinian state from Transjordan to Jordan. There you go. There is a homeland. You've started a 2-state solution in Gaza, and that has not been acceptable either. All of this discourse has to be put in on the table because it has contributed to this. We've seen appalling acts in Colorado. We've seen appalling acts in Washington when those 2 young Israelis were then killed, and also Jewish people were killed, and also the acts within Colorado of someone thinking it's perfectly acceptable to throw Molotov cocktails at Jewish people there. The list, sadly, is endless. But as people have said and have been commentating on the last 24 hours, that if the government in the UK is stamped on this and with these marches early, then this was also, people feel this was brought the temperature down. And as I have previously said, if the UK Prime Minister on the one hand is saying we recognise Palestine, and then wishing the Jewish Jewish people in the UK happy Rosh Hashanah, he really needs to think
Yes.
about what he's saying in this instant. Asuma.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mark, for joining us and sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next news. Russian forces have attacked several energy facilities in several regions of Ukraine, including gas transmission infrastructure facilities with missiles and drones, according to Deputy Minister of Energy for European Integration, Olha Yukrishmuk. Poltava region was attacked by Russian troops last night, and the energy infrastructure facilities were damaged. In Poltava, rescue operations are still underway, and some schools have switched to online learning due to Russian strikes. This latest strike fits into a pattern of escalating aerial warfare in the conflict, with Russia increasingly relying on large drone and missile swarms, shifting tactics to target not just frontline zones, but urban and energy infrastructures deep inside of Ukraine. Now for this discussion, we go back to Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical commentator, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Mark, for staying with us. Now, as both attacks from Russia, they intensify, how is this President Trump's shift in policy towards Ukraine is affecting Russia right now?
As you reported, 381 drones, 35 missiles against the energy infrastructure of Ukraine. Putin has lost a million men, and the Russians are trying to inch forward like trench warfare within the First World War. If we think of the Somme, Verdun, and Passchendaele, and these are potentially the scenes again that are unfolding here, which is inch by inch by inch, and the consequences of that. The other, I should think that President Trump has been frustrated by the fact that he has not been able to bring Putin to the table, and then the actions, the change of behavior from him in this regard is then meaning, well, we still need to bring Vladimir Putin to the table. Does that mean I then have to look at, as we've said before, putting Tomahawk missiles in the theatre of war, etc., and to then support Ukraine? The big concern is, does that escalate completely out of hand? Putin is on about wanting to take territory, and as I just referred to the First World War, you're getting stuck in, you're getting bogged in. is there a line that Putin wants in regard to saying, I've taken this land, that's it, that's where I'm going to stay. I then secured my president being leader of Russia. I'm not going to be thrown out of office. There's not going to be a coup. I can then please all my oligarchs and friends and all this kind of thing. There's a load of issues that are in the mix here. What we do know is on the 22nd of February 2022, he launched a war, which he should not have done. Then there was, within weeks, on the table a way of stopping this, coming to a peace deal. And I think then European politicians are then involved in that, and not taking that forward. This is a very, very this game is extremely dangerous. We want to see this end. The last thing we want is to see an escalation of war. Now, to some economically, maybe that suits them to actually see this escalate. But the amount of death on both sides, if it did, would just be appalling. And as far as I'm concerned, in regard to humanity's sake, we should not go down that road. But on the other hand, Putin's actions, this needs to stop. Hence why Trump is looking at all the levers he has to say, are you continually pushing me, Vladimir? Because what I've commented on before, if you put tomahawks in a theatre of war and they have a distance of 1,000 miles, they can threaten further into Russia. But also Russia has the ballistic missile capability and others to also damage Europe as well. So are we reaching a bit of a stalemate, and who is going to escalate things further? And I pray that does not happen. What we need to do is to see this end, and that is down to Vladimir Putin to make certain decisions and then get to the table for negotiation. And the Ukrainians have been using their drones, using that technology incredibly well to hold the line and to push back, to say, you've taken 20% of our territory. You're not going to take any more. And remember also, President Trump, with his voter base, came in and thought, I can solve this. I want him to solve this. We all do within Europe, but it's not been as easy as he thought it would be, because he's turning around and he's said,
Yes.
Vladimir and him, they have a relationship, a sumo.
Yes. Thank you, Mark, for sharing that insight. Now we stay on this topic. Now, Danish Defense Minister Troels Lund Poulsen has said that Russia is currently waging a hybrid war against NATO and the West. This comes as there were drone sightings in Denmark last week that has forced the closure of Danish airports. The sightings have also prompted European countries to discuss plans for a drone wall. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin has joked that he would not fly drones over Denmark anymore. Russia has also denied responsibility for last week's drone sightings in Denmark. Separately, Poland and its NATO allies have shot down Russian drones in Polish airspace last month. Meanwhile, the Danish intelligence service has said that it is still investigating last week's drone sightings. The intelligence service has said that they do not know who was behind the drones. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical commentator, joins us live from London. Thank you, Mark, for staying with us. Now, Denmark just hosted some leaders alongside Zelensky just yesterday. And now, what role does Denmark play in facilitating dialogue between Ukraine and European leaders?
You've just referred to the incursion of the drone incursion, which they do not know who actually did that, whether that was Russian, whether that was someone else within their own country. And of course, where Denmark is situated, and also with Greenland as well, and all of those states, it is, we hope not, but that's an important theatre of war if that ever went down that road. So these summits are then put in the calendar, and because of what's happened recently to Denmark, that's why their first minister is saying what they are saying, because of the incursions, because of what's been going on. Sadly, with what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, hence their comments, hence the other comments, because Germany have said this, of looking at how can we combat these drone incursions. Now, Vladimir Putin has then said, well, I promise not to fly drones over again. Remember, the Russians are so good at denial, obfuscation, coming up with their own propaganda. But Denmark is then discussing this with all the other European leaders. It's collectivization on that front, and they just feel that with NATO, this is the way that they can stand together, because they are concerned about Russia's actions in Ukraine. Asuma.
And now looking at all these drone attacks and many disruptions that's happening without particularly someone being held responsible. So how do you think that Europe should move forward to counter and protect their infrastructure against these kind of incidents?
Well, as you say, it's where she refers to hybrid, whether that's sabotage, whether the drone attacks, or whether that's hacking. You know, whether someone would then hack various aspects of banking system or other infrastructure of a country, and this is happening all the time to a greater or lesser extent for various countries around the world, and everyone has to beef that up as everyone is so digitally focused. There is discussions about this constantly, and how they can then build up these protections, as you referred to, as we've just referred to, looking at how do we have protection here against drones. A lot of this technology, of course, is new, but it's being used in such a huge way within the theatre of war, meaning that you haven't got to send human beings in, you haven't then got to send other assets in like tanks, but you are then relying on drones. So if you're relying on that, you've then got to build the defense systems to combat them, and they're out there. So that is what they've now got to get together. As I say again, I underline this, we want this to stop, and the way to stop this is people have to be round a table on both sides having a discussion about this, and the sooner the better.
Yes, indeed. And but as these incidents keep occurring, Europe is moving towards building more defense capabilities. So how do you think, how long will it take for Europe to catch up, to maybe not catch up, but to catch up so that they will be able to protect themselves? And how do you think they have to balance? How will they balance between being democratic and between this increasing of defense capabilities?
Assuming again, you raise a very good question, and you allude to that, because there is an element of people like von der Leyen and people at the top, inverted commas, of the European Union, a body that the UK voted to leave, and I thought we had left, but that doesn't seem to be the government policy, where we're virtually taken in there, but not in name only. Van der Leyen, etc., has been accused of pushing towards tyranny, whether that's control of what people say on the internet, and also looking as though they are looking for to increase, you know, a war with Russia in many ways, instead of turning around and saying, well, we need to actually de-escalate this. Now, people would have a go at me for saying that, but they have got to then come together. How do you have that balance between, of course, defense, but also between freedom of speech and other democratic, passionately we all believe in. But that is also under attack as well. It's looking at how we got here, looking at why Europe has been reliant on Russian energy, which is something that Donald Trump questioned in his first term, looking at those relationships. Because if we had done earlier on, maybe we may not have been in this situation. We then have to go back to 1994 when we are 1994 when we're asked Ukraine to get rid of nuclear weapons. We will stand by you. There is so much in here historically that has led to this point. Now, I'm not a military expert. I don't know how long it takes to sort this kind of technology out that is then needed, but that is then going to have to be sorted out. That's what the Europeans are then looking at. And also to add, the Russians are also, every time, as someone else has commented on this, every time they are flying drones over an individual country, it means that assets that they would apply and give to Ukraine direct may not be going there straight away. They might have to be diverted to the particular countries.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mark Sutherland, for joining us and sharing that insight. Now we have a breaking news. The organizers of the Gaza-bound aid flotilla has said that Israel has intercepted its last remaining boat today. Now, after the interceptions of its fellow vessels drew protests worldwide. The Israeli military has dismantled an entire humanitarian flotilla seeking to break its siege on war-ravaged Gaza, arresting hundreds of activists from dozens of vessels. Now we move on. The death toll in the Indonesia school collapse tragedy continues to rise. As per reports, now 9 students are confirmed dead. Earlier today, bodies of 3 boys were recovered from underneath the rubble. Authorities have said that the death toll is expected to rise, with over 50 students still unaccounted for. The school had collapsed on Monday, with rescue workers searching for survivors. However, there are no longer any signs of life. Authorities have said that the school had 2 stories, but more were being added without permits. The rescue mission continues now with heavy excavators equipped with jackhammers to help rescue teams make progress more rapidly. Giving further details on the next phase of rescue mission, here's what the Director of Operations has said.
Hari Jumat, tanggal 3 Oktober 2025, tadi sekitar pukul 07.30 kita berhasil mengekstraksi lagi 1 santri kita, kemudian 1 lagi berhasil kita ekstraksi juga pada pukul 07.36. Yang kedua-duanya kita ekstraksi dari tempat wudhu ya, tempat wudhu. Jadi sepertinya tertimpa banu pecahan ini di tempat wudhu. Jadi kita angkat kedua-duanya dari tempat wudhu. Kalau titiknya mungkin banyak ya, saya bisa menentukan, tapi mungkin yang saya gunakan dengan alat itu mungkin banyak ditemukan, karena tidak mungkin satu tempat itu mungkin 1, misalnya seperti tadi kan tempat wudhu 2. Ini ya kami mohon doanya juga, mudah-mudahan sore ini kita bisa membantu untuk.
Meanwhile, anxious parents on the edge of the hope of their children still being alive camp outside the site of the school collapse. Let's listen into what a parent has said about their missing son.
Ya, saya berharap mudah-mudahan anak saya selamat. 1 hari saya masih punya harapan, 2 hari saya agak, ya Allah, ini gimana, sampai sekarang ini saya ikhlas. Apapun yang terjadi, saya ikhlas. Mengingat dia itu juga di sana itu juga perubahan mondok di sana itu juga sangat positif sekali. Dapat prestasi juga, beasiswa juga. Ya, perubahannya sangat banyak banget semenjak pondok di sini itu.
Now we move on. Bank of Japan Governor Kazuo Ueda has warned that global uncertainties, including the impact of higher U.S. tariffs, could pressure Japanese corporate profits and discourage firms from raising wages. He has said that inflation remained on track to sustainably hit the BOJ's target and reiterated the bank's willingness to continue raising still low interest rates if economic conditions evolve as expected. Ueda, however, pointed to such risks as such weaknesses in the U.S. labor market and the impact of trade tensions, leaving his options open on whether to move on rates in October. The yen edged lower on Friday, pairing a sharp weekly gain as markets weighed the BOJ's policy path and Japan's leadership election this weekend. Let's listen into what Kazuo Ueda has said.
政策の影響がまだ、予想された影響は顕在化していない部分が非常に多いというところについて、今回の短観が強い何かインフォメーションを持っているかというと、必ずしもそうでない。したがって先行きに関する不確実性、不透明性は残る。米国経済のデータが公表される時期が遅れてしまうということについては、なかなか深刻な問題だなというふうに思っています。来年の賃金動向についてどうかということになりますと、講演でも申し上げたように、例えばアメリカ経済が今後どういう経路をたどるか、それが日本経済、日本企業の収益にどういう影響を与えるかということにも大きく依存しますので、そこについての情報はまだ少し不足しているというふうに見ております。
7月に不確実性は極めて高い。7月の関税、
どういう方が総理に、なられるにしても、日本銀行としては十分な意思疎通を図っていきたいということですし、金融政策は、経済物価見通しに基づき持続的な、2% のインフレを安定的に達成するために適正な、政策を行う。
Now for this discussion, we are joined by Dr. A.J. Dua. He's a former Secretary of Commerce and senior economist, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Dr. A.J., for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, how could this impact of higher U.S. tariffs and affect Japan's economic recovery, particularly in terms of corporate profits and their wage growth?
Japan is already under higher tariffs than certain other countries, particularly the UK, and Japan has had to, when it got the tariffs lowered, the Prime Minister had visited Japan, visited the US, and it was, the quid pro quo was that the Japanese will make a huge amount of investment in the US. Now, how that materializes, how that's going to be monitored, etc., all that is yet to be worked out. The Japanese are certainly concerned because, one, for political reasons, they have an election next month. I think the Japanese are now faced with on the ground problem, which is that with the budget, the US, the government departments in the US closing down because of the borrowing limit not having been sanctioned by the parliament as yet. As a result, the data which comes out, monthly data which was due to come out yesterday, or was it the day before? I think the day before, on the 1st of October, about the previous month's employment data. And now that data has not come out. As a result, the state of the economy of the US is not known to the world and not known to the Japanese either. They have to take a guess. So the Japanese BOJ setup has requested policymakers, economists, and the Wall Street to give them an indication of how the US economy is doing. If it is doing well, the Japanese feel that they would also correspondingly do well because of the high volume of trade which they indulge in or have been for doing it for a long time. But in case the data what comes in, not the employment one,
Dr. AJ, we might be losing you over there. There might be some technical issues there. Thank you very much, Dr. AJ, for joining us today and sharing that insight. This is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.